Hello and welcome to Reworking Workforce Development, Chicago's Sector-Based Workforce Centers. This is Jim Torrens of the National Network of Sector Partners. Thank you for joining us today. We'll be talking today about the work that the Chicago workforce system has done to integrate some sector-focused workforce centers into their overall system, and particularly an evaluation report that was just produced by Greg Schrock at the University of Illinois in Chicago Center for Economic Development, Urban Economic Development. And we're delighted to have Greg as well as Joanna Greene from the Chicago Workforce Investment Council, and David Hanson and Jeffrey Marcella of the City of Chicago Department of Community Development. We think that this is a very exciting report and project because we care deeply about sector approaches, and we know that people out there are looking for ways to both meet the needs of industry and find pathways to good jobs for individuals, and particularly low-income individuals. I have a series of polls to give. Before I start into my brief introductions, I thought it would be useful because there are many of you who are joining us from outside the NNSP network, and welcome to you. We're glad to have you. That it might be useful to understand how familiar you all feel with sector initiatives. So this is a quick poll. We'd like to get a sense from you of how familiar are you with the sector concept? And I'll try to use that to tailor what I present. We'll just take about 15 more seconds.
What does organizers?
And as you see, there's quite a spread among us, and that's great. So those of you who are very experienced already, we hope that you'll contribute both in the form of questions and comments if you have them. Those of you who are joining us and are new to sector work, well, we really do look forward to your questions and are glad to have your participation. So since there's quite a mix of participants online, I just want to take a few minutes to run through some concepts about sector initiatives. I mean, their key characteristics are industry-specific, regional, and meeting both the needs of employers and workers. In particular, there's some differences between sector initiatives and other workforce efforts. And one is that it's an intensive focus on an industry and not just with particular individual employers, and it's within a regional labor market. We really believe that labor markets are regional and don't necessarily conform to geographic boundaries. They're typically led by a workforce intermediary that has credibility in the industry, and I think you'll see that, at least in my view, these workforce centers in Chicago have essentially become those intermediaries and developed their credibility with the industry through the work that they've done. Creates new pathways into jobs, and then within those jobs to advancement, particularly for low-wage workers. Our organization, the Insight Center for Community Economic Development, is committed to advancing economic security for low-income communities, and I know that that's crucially important to many of you on the call as well. And last, and I think this is often overlooked, the idea that there are system changes that result from the work, either new pathways, new resources that get allocated to helping employers meet their labor needs and helping workers get good jobs and benefiting the community at large. And one of the things that excites us also about the work that Chicago has done is that it's having an impact on the entire system as it becomes more integrated in its approach. This is a graphic that demonstrates the way that a workforce intermediary can play a role in both in connecting job seekers and employers and in meeting their needs. I won't spend too much time on this, but you'll see that the workforce intermediary can serve as a broker of other services to help in those ways. And briefly, here's some results that employers have expressed. These come from a third-party evaluation of the Massachusetts Building Essential Skills Through Training Initiative, which funded regional industry teams. And even though each team worked with one industry, they represented several industries throughout the state. And you'll see that employers found participating in sector initiatives beneficial, both in reduced rework, in limited customer complaints in industries that were customer service focused, and in the opportunity to engage in a non-competitive way with their peers. The results for workers are compelling, and the most compelling evidence thus far, I believe, is a recent report by Public-Private Ventures on the Sectoral Employment Impact Study supported by the Mott Foundation. And if you haven't seen that yet, they've put out an issue brief with preliminary results. They'll be issuing a full report this fall. But the evidence is quite compelling, and this is the first random assignment study which tracked the results of for those who both participated in sector-based training and who didn't. And as you can see here, over the long term, over a 24-month period, the benefits to those who participated in this training were great. Why do we care? Well, we are the National Network of Sector Partners. Our mission is essentially to promote and support sector initiatives. And if you're interested in the same topic, you can look on our website. There are lots of resources there, and as well as the opportunity to become a member. We're a membership organization with more than 300 members nationwide. You can even follow us on Twitter if you like. Okay, so some logistics before we get back to our presenters. Your phones are muted, and we'll unmute you when you need to speak. I see some hands raised, which I appreciate, and I will do my best to get to you in a moment, as well as some questions that have been submitted, and I will respond using the questions pane of the control panel. And we do encourage you to submit questions through the questions pane so that we can, when we get to the question and answer period, call on those who have already sent us questions. You can also minimize this control panel to get it out of your way by clicking on the little double arrow up at the top. This session is being recorded, and we'll send links to the recording and the slideshow and the reports that are discussed. So don't feel that you have to write everything down, and do pass it on to others who you think might be interested but who are not able to attend today. Okay, another quick poll just to give us a sense of who's in the room. If we were meeting in person, we would be able to see you, and you would be able to see each other. But since that's not the case, let's get a quick glimpse at what types of organizations you represent. And if you would, take a minute and or maybe 30 seconds, and just put in your input, so we get a sense of who we're talking to, who's going to be participating. And I'll close the polls in just a moment. It's unfortunate that we only had 5 options to choose from. You'll see the results. Other is a large category. We were limited in our options. But I'm not surprised to see public workforce agencies so prominently featured here. It's clear that the work that Chicago is doing is really relevant to WIBs all around the country, as well as at the state and national levels as models that agencies are seeking to promote. So I think that's not surprising but interesting finding. And I have one more poll. You're going to be polled out, but I think this is the last one, which is just about what is your industry sector focus? And I know that, oops, sorry, I'm bringing it up. Here we go. I know that manufacturing and hospitality may be prominently featured here. The between healthcare and manufacturing, we've learned through a survey that we do every 2 years, are more than half of sector initiatives. That may have changed, and we're eager to find out what the composition of sector initiatives is nationwide. We have sent out links to a survey for something we call Sector Snapshots. I'll include a link to that in the webinar materials after the fact. And if you want to make sure that the sector you work in is represented and your organization shows up on our sort of glimpse at what sector initiatives look like around the country, please do respond to that and give us information about what you do. So here's the results. Again, we have the other problem. That's actually quite interesting. There's so many other sectors represented. And manufacturing, no surprise, but healthcare clearly also a major area for sector work. Okay, with that, I'm going to turn things over to our presenters. You may be relieved to note. We're really glad to have such a distinguished panel. David Hanson and Jeffrey Marcella from the City of Chicago Department of Community Development, Greg Schrock from the UIC Center for Urban Economic Development, and Greg is the author of the evaluation report. And then I'll hand it over to Joanna Greene from the Chicago Workforce Investment Council to offer a few prefatory remarks.
Thank you, Jim. This is Joanna Green, and first of all, I wanted to thank all of you for joining the webinar. I think that I can speak for all of the presenters as well as NNSP to say we were thrilled by the number of folks that are interested in the sector centers that we've developed here in Chicago. We're going to break the presentation down because there's a lot of information that we want to cover in this, and we also want to leave a big block of time for questions and answers. One initial thing to mention is that the report is posted on the Chicago Workforce Investment Board site, which is just chicagoworkforceboard.com for your reference later on, and we also do have hard copies as well as CDs available. So how we're going to break up the presentation today is that Dave Hanson and Jeff Marcella from the Department of Community Development, which is our Title I Adult and Dislocated Worker Agency for the City of Chicago, will talk about the sectoral initiatives, and we'll talk about the background and how the centers were developed. The key findings and the evaluation, Greg Schrock, who is the author of the report, will talk about the challenges and implications, and Dave, Jeff, and Greg will talk about the recommendations and responses. I am just going to give a brief overview of the evolution of sector work in the City of Chicago. The Chicago Workforce Board, we've just been renamed and reorganized into the Chicago Workforce Investment Council, has been fortunate to work on sector-based initiatives with the City of Chicago since 2002. In 2002, the Chicago Workforce Board, which is part of a regional consortium of boards known as the Workforce Boards of Metropolitan Chicago, held a healthcare workforce summit in December of 2002, and we were pleased that over 160 people chose to come to that summit, and they were from workforce backgrounds, the educational community, the training community, and the event was such a success that we continued along and had summits in manufacturing in 2003, in transportation, warehousing, and distribution in 2004. And in hospitality, we also had a summit. Because of the great interest and because the board works so closely with the Department of Community Development, we began discussions within our workforce board structure. We have a committee called the Sectoral Planning Committee, which really looked at sector-based initiatives in the city of Chicago. And we began the planning process of how to look at the WIA funding and how to allocate some money to develop 2 centers that would specifically focus on industry sectors. We were also very fortunate to receive 2 very generous grants from the Joyce Foundation, the first of which was the development of a publication called Career Pathways and Crosswalks in the Hotel, Retail, and Restaurant Industries. And Greg Schrock, who is one of our panelists, was also one of the authors on that report. And that report really focused on career pathways and mobility within the hospitality sector. And that information was used in the development of the Workforce Center as well as the work that's being done there on a daily basis. That also is available on our website if you're interested. So we move along, and then the state of Illinois, through our Department of Commerce and Economic Development, decided that they were going to develop an initiative called the Critical Skills Shortages Initiative. And this was a sector-based initiative where the state came in and provided WIA funding to do intensive work in training in specific high-skilled, high-growth sectors. Manufacturing was one of those sectors, and this was a very large initiative over a 3-year period where there was a lot of needs assessment done, and the work and the research that was developed from those sector analyses also went into the development of our workforce centers. The City of Chicago, the Department of Community Development, put out 2 requests for proposals in 2005 and received a number of applications for providers for both ManufacturingWorks and ServiceWorks. And I think that's a very brief overview of the development of our programs. Of course, all of us are available for conversations or email after the webinar if people have additional questions. But right now I'm going to turn the conversation over to Dave Hanson and Jeff Marcella from DCD, who are going to talk about the vision of the sector centers and how they operate. Thank you.
Thanks, Joanna, and I'd like to thank Jim and the National Network of Sector Partners for allowing us to present today on our sector initiatives. To build off of Joanna's foundation about our decision to go into the sectors of manufacturing and hospitality, first we had some strong community partners and partnership with labor, which was part of a major research project from the Department of Labor that asked the community, the Center for Labor and Community Research and the CFL to identify gaps in the workforce development system in meeting the needs of manufacturers regionally to Chicago. We took that data to help us make the decision about manufacturing, how many dollars to put in the sector initiative, and so forth. We used the research that Joanna just mentioned regarding hospitality. It's probably important to note that the state did not identify hospitality as part of a critical skills shortage initiative, but locally it was determined that it was there was a shortage, and thusly our decision to put our resources into hospitality. That led to the launch of the Chicago Leads Initiative and our other sector initiatives. And just for 1 second to explain the Chicago Leads Initiative, and that is a citywide mayoral-led initiative to align economic development and workforce development and education to better meet the needs of businesses in the city of Chicago. And since we've launched ManufacturingWorks and ServiceWorks, we've also launched transportation and distribution and logistics works as well. To move on to the vision, underneath the Department of the Mayor's Office of Workforce Development, which we were previously called prior to this year, we started a strategic planning process that led us to identifying our two primary customers, being businesses and individuals, job-seeking individuals, where we identified in the sectors that we were going to make the employers the critical customer was important. The employer as the main customer, we were able to better meet the needs of job-seeking customers. And as most of you know, the workforce system, that is the government-funded workforce system, primarily looks at the outcomes of how well we meet individuals, but very little to how well we meet the businesses. So we're going to get in this a little bit more, but some of the business performance metrics that we added to the sectors was interview to hire ratios. So both centers provide us data quarterly on interview to hire ratios and retention and business return businesses. So we're very interested in how many businesses are coming back to use our system. Sectors work as a hub for the WIA system. And I should explain what our WIA system is briefly, and that is we have 5 workforce centers, or one-stops. We have 22 delegate agencies, smaller, if you would, workforce centers than the one-stops. The opportunity for the sectors to be the industry experts, to have individuals within those sectors to know the business. We had to hire from the business, from the industry. And we needed to teach the supply side to the WorkNet Chicago providers. So to get to them that there's growth, there's employment opportunities in manufacturing, the same with the hospitality industry, to how to screen for a candidate, what skill sets we're looking for, a better understanding of the individual's aptitude in manufacturing, for example. They're also teaching the individual going through the WorkNet system about the opportunities in manufacturing and continuing education through our system. The key to developing innovative training and placement programs with employers, listening to employers, the incumbent training opportunities, internships, and mentoring programs, a big part of the sector system. To move on to the partners, the sector businesses, looking at in manufacturing, we included in our advisory committees metal, food, plastic. We included different sizes of businesses, from small shops to craft food, if you would. The including business association in advisory committees to the sectors. We had the Illinois Manufacturing Association. We have the Illinois
Hotel and Lodging Association, the Restaurant Association, as just to mention a couple in terms of business associations that were critical to helping us with the design and the implementation of the sector centers. We mentioned labor. Labor was a key to the both sectors, and specifically in the creation of manufacturing. And in fact, CFL sits as a partner. Education is a primary. It's critical in terms of our city college system, our K through 12 as well as some of our proprietary schools. In terms of when we're able to bring businesses to the table to help us with the what's working, what's not working, getting them to the table is not an easy thing. Many of these businesses have been part of a prior attempt to meet workforce needs, so it was just to give a don't want to make it sound like it was a simple process of bringing business to the table. It wasn't. The associations were easier to get to the table, but businesses, because of their past experience and success or lack of success of working with a government-funded workforce system in the past, they were somewhat reluctant, so we had to entice them. We had to use the mayor, a number of the associations to help us get the individual businesses to the table and to be vital parts of that. Economic development, making this part of your economic development strategy is key to the success of a sector initiative. Community-based organizations, looking outside the traditional partners that you would have with CBOs. I mentioned before about the Center for Labor and Community Research that has in-depth, long-term understanding of manufacturing and being a key advisory part of our program. That's the snapshot of my piece. I'm going to turn it over to Jeff, Marcella, to take you through the next slides.
Thanks, Dave. Just a couple additional thoughts about that, that background, and especially about the role of the community-based organizations. Because in Chicago we have a large, WIA system made up of this large number of organizations, the idea of a full-scale center was how we looked at specialization. We know there are, obviously smaller workforce areas, and I think the lesson learned from that is just find ways to truly specialize between the functions of serving the job seeker and serving the business. I think in smaller agencies, all too often a job developer is also the case manager, and you're being sort of pulled in two directions, and it's very difficult to to do both things, and inevitably I think business services go lacking. We've made a focus with certainly with ManufacturingWorks and ServiceWorks to hire the job developer staff from business, so they have a real expertise in that, less than in the traditional social service and workforce development arena. And that's been a real benefit. I think recently, with the economy as it is, it's even easier to find HR reps from business who are in need of this kind of employment as well. The other, I guess, our next point is about the training that goes on at the centers. That's one of the main activities is training, but just a number of services that we provide specifically through ManufacturingWorks and ServiceWorks is initially recruiting and screening of candidates. Now, some of those candidates come directly from the wider workforce system, and we're putting in place some strategies right now to even increase the number that come directly from our other one-stops and our other agencies. But business services are a lot more critical. So a needs assessment and customized response plans for each business. This we have during parts of our time had even some specialist subcontracting agencies to do this business assessment, and ManufacturingWorks and ServiceWorks do this, where they'll really immerse in interacting with the business, spend multiple days on the shop floor or within the firm, identifying what that company's risk points are, and then developing strategies to meet those. Often those strategies are workforce training, things like incumbent training for their existing workforce, helping customize a training program for their recruiting activities, things like providing that company with just more information about the labor market. And I know Greg will talk about our job quality report, where really just introducing a company to the fact that they're what the comps are, what the comparable wages paid, what the comparable situations are for workers, and why a company may be lagging behind in their ability to recruiting. And then also, obviously, being a resource for information for companies on the variety of other acronyms that are out there. There's right now tax credits, obviously economic incentives of various kinds, various ways that companies can help pay for training. And so our entities leverage all of those other resources and all of those other dollars by helping to provide those kinds of services. Another real important role that our centers have played, up the slide a little bit, is the industry input and the approval of training curricula. We have been very pleased with the role of, particularly in our manufacturing sector, because there's a little more training that goes on in that sector than in the hospitality industry, but specifically the ability to curricula at our community colleges, at our private trainers in the area, to help make sure those are as current, as appropriate as possible. So bringing in industry experts, representatives from specific companies, but then also from some of the manufacturing organizations, for instance, the national NIMS, the credentials of metalworking skills, to bring those folks in to look at the curricula at a given school and help make sure that it is up to speed and as current as possible. And we've had some real success. I know our partner, the community colleges, the city colleges of Chicago, is very proud now that they have most of the graduates coming out of several of their metalworking and CNC, computer numeric control programs, are actually now testing for and getting those credentials. And we take some pride in the role that we've played in helping to influence those things. So Jim, I'm moving on to the next slide. The two things that we've sort of set up for our sector centers is giving businesses what they want and giving businesses what they need. And I'll talk a little bit about that later. But giving them what they want, obviously businesses want help with recruiting. That's one of the first things they say that they need is, get me good workers. And so it is this intensive observation, really listening, and again, having people from industry as your staff as opposed to folks that may just have a workforce background, so that they can really understand the language. Most of us here don't come from manufacturing, but we're learning up quick, and in both our industries, we've even had the staff go to training related to the industry. So our job developer, our workforce staff now have some metalworking skills themselves and have been on the shop floor getting trained, so that by some of our top trainers. Skills analysis, and again, developing a job profile more than just a job description, a real comprehensive assessment. Companies want speed, they want professionalism. We say think like business, not like a nonprofit. And the first part is sort of admitting that you have a problem, and admitting that we do, in many ways, in many cases, our workforce systems come from a nonprofit or a social service background. Our ancient history would be, would you please hire my poor people, and would you be, so kind as a company to look at the candidates that we have, as opposed to we have a quality product, we have skills, that we provide, and so really thinking, what does a business want, and what, how do they want our system to behave, and trying to avoid workforce system jargon. I think we have used only a few acronyms in this presentation. There will be more, but we know that our agencies try to really avoid that. One of the anecdotes, we talked about the business involvement, and our business advisory group for our manufacturing industry at one point, it was evident that the members of the group had been on so many committees related to workforce development over the years that they knew our language and were essentially one of us at that point. Even though they were the HR rep or the executive at a manufacturing firm, they knew so much that now we had to seek out other businesses who weren't so in our game to do a reality check, because the ones who had been exposed to our system for a long time were very pleased that we were moving in the right direction. Several said, this is the last time I'm going to sit on a board like this because I've done it so many times, this one better work, and they've said now, yes, this one is working, but seeking out other businesses who aren't part of that system. The other side of the coin is giving business what they need, and we talked about the assessment, really being able to look at them and assess their strengths and weaknesses. A lot of manufacturers obviously have an aging workforce, so they have some openness to problems there, that they're going to have very many retirements all at one time. Hospitality industry knows that it has turnover problems and so on, and really being that reality check for a company about the things that they may need to do if they want to make a change, and not being honest with them and not letting them just sort of believe that, yes, we'll send you some workers and that will solve your problem. It's like, no, it won't. We say sometimes the part of that has to do with the tiers that we've set up, and we have a system, informal, it's not a hard and fast set of rules, but where we look at each company and that as we assess them and determine how appropriate they are for which of our services. And so a high-tier company is one that pays good wages, has benefits, has a coherent advancement plan within its organization, has coherent training to help build career pathways within their organization, and so customers, workers can easily move up and understand how they move up. It might not be easy to move up, but it's clear that there are those pathways. And a lower tier company may do less of those things. And then we have our tier 0, which is companies that we wouldn't work with, that don't even pay a living wage and don't even have adequate health and facilities and so on. And what's interesting about those tiers is the lower tier firms are ripe for, again, those that are at least at a basic level of legality and appropriateness as a company, are very ripe for our business development tools. So in manufacturing, that might be lean manufacturing. In hospitality, it might be incumbent training through the National Retail Federation's customer service credentialing. They may need the labor market information that we can provide them about their own industry and about comparable economic circumstances and the labor market in our city. They may be able to really benefit from some of these other activities, whereas we're not ready to send them candidates, because we believe that there are better jobs out there for our qualified workers that come through the doors. Conversely, those at a higher tier may not need as much of some of those activities, and they're really ready, obviously, for us to be sending workers. And it's we pinch ourselves sometimes when we talk this way, because it's so different from the "will you please hire our people," that, again, we have a service to offer you, and our candidates, knowing that they're coming out of high-quality training programs, curriculum that we have run through, again, high-tier businesses, and through a intensive WIA, Workforce Investment Act system of job readiness and job preparation, coming with a lot of support services behind them. This is a quality product, if you will, and investing that in a lower tier business isn't at the isn't necessary in this case. And again, one of the real pieces that we've been talking about is business transformation, and that's that helping those companies move up their tiers. The ideal is you provide some training, you provide resources, you help a company to be more competitive itself, you help it to lean manufacturing. We offer a specific service in that area and helping them to move up. And I know Greg can talk a little more about this maybe toward the end of the presentation when we talk about the second report that's been released about job quality and how our sector centers have really been influential in stepping into companies and helping them to transform themselves. The operations, just again a little bit of the map. We've got a nice slide that helps out. So the sector center being the hub between several different entities, job seekers, business service providers and employers. The big E's on the right are employers. The big, I guess, either Fisher-Price toy characters or chess pieces on the left are the workers. The workforce development system and providers, and then job training entities. And so it really is interactions among all of those groups and helping them to work better together. And for us, it took having a specific organization, a sector center, in, again, different types of workforce areas. A smaller workforce area, it may just having a guru, a team, several staff who are involved with answering to the sector first, and then negotiating for those businesses the territory of job seekers, workforce development system, and the training that's available. Job training is obviously the critical piece, the skills training above and beyond simply job readiness training and so on, but we know that in some industries, for instance, a little bit less of that in hospitality, a little bit more of it in manufacturing. Other industries we look at, healthcare will probably have sort of somewhere in the middle of those in terms of what's for the higher skilled training and what's more entry and a little bit less training required jobs. Some of our accomplishments, things we're proud of on the next slide, are just some of the numbers, and so you get a sense of the scale. We've been at this for about 4 years now, and this is some data from about 3.5 years. Our ManufacturingWorks and ServiceWorks, each serving about 400 unique and distinct businesses over that time, leasing in the 1,500 individuals. Wages a little bit different between the two industries, closer to $12.50 in manufacturing and about $10.25 in service. And then what we call our interview to hire ratio. It's important for us to monitor business outcomes, and we have a few different ways of doing that. I know Dave mentioned some of that at the beginning. I'll go into that a little bit more now. Making sure that we're sending the company the right candidates. We are becoming for them their screening, and we are teaching the rest of our workforce system how to identify the right individuals who are qualified and to train individuals to the right qualifications for the company. And this ratio here, this is a slide that's a little bit old. We're down really closer to about 1.2 to 1.4 to 1 interviews. So every time, literally, if you send 2 people, certainly one of them is getting the job, and if you send 3, 2 are getting a job. You're down really almost to a 1-to-1 ratio, which is perfect at that point. You can never be perfect in that way. I would also mention that the wages, we're higher than this now. We've had annual increases in both centers. So both started around $9.50 or $10 the first year. ServiceWorks is inching up, and I think they're closer to $10.50 now. ManufacturingWorks, I know, was $9.50, then $11.50. Last year was $12.50, and we're at $12.87 this year. So it's inching up each year. And another few of the kind of statistics that we look at are the longer-term retention. Those programs are hovering around 80 to 90% in the people that are retained on the job for the first 90 days, so we're proud of that. And we're collecting statistics. We've never, unfortunately, don't have the greatest mechanisms of acquiring the long term, the 1-year retention. But we continue to collect that and be focused on improving those kinds of retention because we're trying to build career pathways in the industry. We're trying to help individuals, if not stay on the same job, and again, the same job may not be the right thing. The next job, the better job, is hopefully the right thing for a lot of our candidates. And another real important statistic is what we call business retention. And we have over half of the businesses that have ever been served in previous years continue to be served in subsequent years. And with that, as well as knowing that you're always outreaching to new companies, so you don't want all just only the same ones. You want to be bringing on new ones in subsequent years. And I think that is a little bit of background. It's really time to turn it over to Meg to talk a lot more about the evaluation.
Great, thanks, Jeff. In the interest of time, just so that we have enough time for questions, I'm going to move through my slides relatively quickly and try and leave time for questions at the end. The evaluation was funded by the Joyce Foundation, and Joanna had mentioned early on that the Joyce Foundation had funded a couple different projects with the Workforce Board, and this was the second of those projects. And just as a little bit of background, the Center for Urban Economic Development, where I work, is an applied research center of the College of Urban Planning and Public Affairs at the University of Illinois at Chicago. And when the Workforce Board received the grant from the Joyce Foundation, they contracted with us to help them answer some of these questions that I'm going to talk about here. And really the foremost question was, are these centers serving businesses more effectively than the traditional way of comprehensive workforce centers or so-called one-stops? Secondarily, are they serving the needs of job seekers? Obviously, this is an important question, even as the focus of the system really looks more and more at businesses. Job seekers remain obviously a key interest. Third, from a service delivery standpoint, do these centers make the system more efficient and effective? And then finally, how can the model be improved and refined over time? And what can we say about it from the standpoint of recommending it to other workforce areas and other cities and regions across the country? And those final two questions really map directly on to the purposes. One was really an internal purpose, which was really helping the city think through, the city and the Workforce Board think through how to improve their approach. But then secondly, and this was, I know, a major concern for the Joyce Foundation, was, how do we take what Chicago has learned and communicate that on a national basis? And doing seminars, webinars like this are an important part of that. Next slide. In terms of the evaluation itself, there are a couple different modes of analysis, a lot of interviews with agencies, contractors, subcontractors, over 30 employers across manufacturing and services, as well as representatives from within the one-stops and different affiliates. You'll note we did not do any direct collection of information from job seekers. That was partly an issue of resources. And finally, we looked at a lot of the data that Jeff was presenting a little bit ago, and worked a lot with each of the contractors from ManufacturingWorks and ServiceWorks to really parse through their programmatic data. And the report in the back has some kind of descriptive tables of who is being served in terms of job seeker characteristics and employer characteristics. And I'm not going to go into that here. Next slide. There were three overall findings that I think stand out in terms of what the sector centers have brought to the public workforce system in Chicago. The first is really about relevance. The finding being that the sector centers have made the publicly funded workforce development system more relevant to employers and to key industries in Chicago. And there are really two parts of this. One is understanding that recruitment and job matching, which is really the historic core function of the workforce system in terms of the labor exchange function between employers and job seekers is really only one element of the workforce needs that companies face. And so in order to really be relevant, the system has to offer a broader suite of services than just job matching, and that gets into organizational assessment, incumbent worker training, other kinds of information, labor market information, and some of this is obviously available within the comprehensive one-stops, but I think making a more prominent suite of human resources and tools available to companies. And second is how you go about some of these traditional recruitment approaches, really going about them in a way that starts from the needs of the businesses. And Jeff mentioned hiring people who have industry experience and really are embedded in how the manufacturing industry or how the hospitality industry works. And I think the specialization within the system that this sectoral approach allows for a more effective mode of engagement with employers so that you can really speak their language. And the result that we found from the evaluation was a significant share of the employers that we talked to had either not interfaced with the publicly funded system in the past, or had bad experiences in the past, but were significantly more satisfied in working with ManufacturingWorks and ServiceWorks. The second finding had to do with equity and access, and both Jim and Jeff have mentioned a follow-on report that is just being made available now through the Workforce Board's website. Finding being that the centers really do create a platform for addressing issues of equity and access, and a lot of this has to do with really developing a more business-focused approach. You really get in and you understand what the problems are that employers face. It's not simply, as Jeff said, it's not giving them what they want always. In some cases, it's a matter of giving them what they need, and some of that is a recognition that poor HR practices lead to a need for ongoing recruitment. And for the centers, a lot of it is about developing trusting relationships, meeting needs in the short term that build trust, that over time can be developed and leveraged into opportunities to say, you know what, we can find people at $9 an hour, but really for what you're asking, the going rate is $10 an hour. Now, in many cases, the employers may not recognize, that they're out of touch with what the labor market reality is. But this is a really core function that these sector centers play, is having that kind of intelligence, if you will, about what's going on, not just in the labor market in general, but very specifically for key occupations, whether you're talking about welders or other kinds of service occupations. I think it's a really important point. And the report looks at a couple different case studies where the sector centers engage with businesses around job quality issues. The other two areas would be around hiring patterns and trying to develop more inclusionary hiring, and then finally around developing internal career ladders. And part of that goes to the kind of broad array of service offerings, not simply getting people in the door, but helping build the pathways up so that people can actually advance. And that's something that meets the needs of businesses as well as those of job seekers. Finally, the third finding has to do with systems integration, and I think this is a really important point about the role of the centers as being a driver of integration within the system, both in terms of the referral networks. You think about the ManufacturingWorks and ServiceWorks as being the kind of lead job developers for these key sectors, and they're transmitting those relationships out into the system, into the one-stops, in the community-based organizations, and other kinds of, the Chicago Public Schools and other kinds of areas that can really benefit from the contacts and connections that these two sector centers develop. Second is really developing the high-level partnerships, and the sector centers in both cases have operated really as kind of on-the-ground implementation wings of sectoral partnerships in each industry. In the case of manufacturing, with the Chicago Manufacturing Renaissance Council. In the case of ServiceWorks, with the Hospitality Initiative within Chicago Lead. So in both cases, you're using the sector centers as a way to implement a lot of the high-level dialogue that goes on within those partnerships. And then finally, building tighter relationships with the training providers and using the relationships that they're developing with businesses to communicate, okay, what do they need? What are the standards they're looking for? And really trying to bring up the quality and infuse them with the standards that the industry needs. Now, there are a number of challenges that come with this model, and part of, I mean, there are a lot of idiosyncratic things, but part of what we tried to pull out was, you know, what are the kind of broader challenges of this approach? And the first, and I think the most important one, is there is a tension between meeting the needs of the employers and meeting the needs of job seekers. I think ideally we would think about them as win-win, but I think the daily reality was that it wasn't always that simple. More broadly, the way I would think about it is between the need for performance and the need for development. And that's kind of these are kind of abstract concepts, but if you think about it, I mean, a lot of it boiled down to, okay, we need to meet the needs of these companies now. And I think there was a tension between, okay, we got to give them the people, the best people in our pool, and you know, I think within the workforce system, there's obviously that tension between you know, so-called creaming of the best candidates and not providing opportunity for the hardest people who may have the most barriers. And at the same time, going to training providers who may be ready to go versus trying to build up the overall capacity within the system. So these are like short-term tensions between short-term and long-term goals. And so that was really a broad challenge that we identified. Second is really focusing on quality and not just quantity. And because a lot of the funding for this came from the Workforce Investment Act, there was a real tension in terms of making sure that they weren't necessarily losing the number of placements that came from the resources that were redirected from other centers. And you know, and a lot of the relationships with businesses are very labor intensive, and they don't necessarily involve large hiring events. And so that was really a tension, particularly pertaining to the resource base that they used. And again, that relates directly into this next point about it being a double-edged sword. The downside of using work of WIA funds is that it really did push this focus on, okay, we need to get people into jobs and kind of hit our numbers, but it also really pushed the need to integrate the overall system for you know, the affiliates and the one-stops, and to really try and build a referral network. I mean, I think unfortunately in many cases what you see with sectoral initiatives is that they operate as standalone entities where they're working with their own job seekers, they're working with their own employers, and they're kind of doing their own thing, and they're not necessarily transmitting what they're doing out into the rest of the system. And I think that's something that Chicago has been very successful on. And I think using the WIA funds kind of created that stimulus, that prod, if you will. Further challenges, next slide. Again, to the extent that they're bringing better quality employers, better quality jobs into the system, it really creates a pipeline issue, and making sure that you're building a pipeline within the training system to get people into those better paying jobs, whether you're talking about higher level manufacturing, you know, machinist and welder type jobs, or you know, higher level guest service agent jobs within the hotel industry. You know, making sure that people have the skills and the opportunities to get those jobs, and that's part of that issue of longer term pipeline development. You know, some of it is just logistical. Whenever you have, you know, so the second point on this slide being system coordination, part of the challenge of having ManufacturingWorks and ServiceWorks as hubs is that they had to work with different providers and develop systems for coordinating around referral networks, and as well as on the demand side in working with industrial retention organizations, with economic development entities, to make sure that they have a seamless approach to working with businesses. And that, doesn't always work as easily as you would like, and it was something that I think they've had to work through over time, how you develop that system. Third, and Jeff talked about this, and Dave talked about this as well, this issue of collecting different kinds of data. All the WIA metrics are really job seeker based. Fourth, fostering cooperation and learning. I think that's something that was an ongoing challenge to try and provide an environment where there was peer learning that was going on within the overall system. And finally, trying to build that brand for ManufacturingWorks and ServiceWorks as brands that were not necessarily tied to the providers who were contracted to operate those centers. And that, and I think that was a really important challenge, because you were trying to make ManufacturingWorks and ServiceWorks a system brand rather than those of the individual providers. And so if people have questions, I can answer that, talk more about that, but that was something that was certainly a challenge. What were the takeaways from this? Next slide. There were really 4 broad implications that we identified for workforce development practice. And one is, developing a more business-focused approach, which Chicago has certainly done in this case, is really important, but it's not an end in itself. The end is developing a more functional workforce system that works for both employers and for job seekers. And making the system a more mainstream, a more desirable source of talent for employers is really important, but so is making the system a portal to better jobs for job seekers. And I think it's important not to lose sight of that point. Sectors aren't everything. I realize I'm saying this, with the National Network of Sector Partners here, but I think what they are really important for is as an organizing tool for organizing different resources and aligning toward particular goals. And I think that's the key takeaway from the idea of sectors, is that it's really it's an organizing tool. Third, if you don't really think about some of these equity issues and job quality issues from the beginning, I think it's hard to kind of pull them in after the fact. I think you have to have people who, who are kind of watching what's going on, who are really making sure that you're encouraging progressive practices on the part of employers, that you're not rewarding low-road practices on the part of companies. And I think I would particularly point out the role of the Sector Planning Committee, and groups like Women Employed and Chicago Jobs Council, really as outside non-governmental entities who were really at the table making sure that some of these issues were being addressed. And then finally, just as a resource issue, public funding in this case was really important, but it came with its own challenges. And I think in the long term, you have to think about a mix of different funding sources in order to achieve the kind of flexibility and sustainability. And part of that is fee-for-service, and both centers have been moving in that direction as a way not just of trying to augment their resource base, but really to demonstrate market viability. And that's a really, one of the things that I heard was, well, if we would be willing to pay for this. A number of the employers we talked to said we would be willing to pay for this. However, our standards are going to be that much higher. And I think it's important for the system to set its standards high, or have its standards set high on the part of employers. When it's free, people value what they pay for things. And I think I think it's an overall shift within the system. So with that, I'm going to jump to the last 2 slides, and Dave and Jeff can kind of jump in. From the internal management standpoint, there were really 4 recommendations that I made. One was around the funding stream. The second was around just the overall approach and the potential for, a more decentralized approach to the centers. And Jeff and Dave, I can let you jump in here if you like.
I think we have talked about some of those things. We'd always like more money. If there's any foundations on the phone, please, we'd love to talk to you more. And we're looking at fee-for-service. This year, we intended to launch some of that this spring, but just looking at the economy and the companies that we're trying to serve, this was just not a moment to start asking them for some additional resources at that point. And then again, the decentralized model, I think we talked a little about it, and the idea of sector teams, we're formalizing again, and this is maybe kind of inside our large system, but the idea of a team working at each of the various other sites, maybe one rep from each of those sites, or even fewer, just those agencies of the community-based ones who want to focus on each industry would join a team, and they would meet monthly and interact on the phone and really share their job leads and listings across them and learn from the sector hub, the sector expert agencies, more formally about the recruiting opportunities and the training opportunities and the skills needed in the industry.
And just to give you an idea regarding the diversity of both centers are about 80% via and 20% City of Chicago tax dollars go into it. When we look at other opportunities, alternative to the bricks and mortar, with the TDL, we separated transportation and distribution into three different centers, into rail, into material handling, and into truck driving. And they all had, and they taking direction from the Chicago Leads Business Advisory Committee for TDL.
And then just the final two recommendations, and just very, very quickly, next slide, was really trying to look for opportunities to expand out regionally, and then looking at the data systems. A lot of the data systems that both centers use are really, job seeker based, or really case management systems, and trying to build a stronger platform that has a stronger demand side component. Jeff, I don't know if you have any thoughts about that.
I mean, just to the point that we feel that that's a vital next step to the integration of the system. We've moved forward in terms of funding a proposal to do the integration on an IT standpoint, so we're able to share job leads and able to share the status of those individuals going through the system in those sectors.
Okay. It's Jim again, and I want to thank you, Greg, Dave, Jeff, Joanna, for providing so much useful information. It's very rich. I want to say that we're probably not going to be able to get to all of the questions that have been asked, and I apologize for that. But I do want to assure you that we'll respond offline. So if we don't get to your question in the webinar, we will email you or contact you otherwise. I have a few questions that I'll call upon in a minute. I wanted to acknowledge a couple of things that, Greg, you mentioned. We are the National Network of Sector Partners, but we do acknowledge the sector isn't everything. So in case you're worried about us being too partisan, and I think that your explanatory paragraph about that in the report is really superb, and I would just recommend that people look at it. It's on page 28. I highlighted it as a very nice description of the role that sector initiatives can play. We're thinking a lot about the role that sector initiatives are playing within local WIBs lately. And certainly, there are a couple of different ways that WIBs are doing this. One, where it's essentially outside the one-stop system, and one in which it involves a kind of restructuring of the one-stop. And it's clear that Chicago is looking for your sector centers to play a transformative role, and it sounds like that's happening. So we're quite excited about that. I want to also acknowledge that folks have submitted questions up front in the registration process, and we did try to take those into account in the course of the presentation. So I hope that they were answered. And if you haven't had those questions answered, submit them. We may not get to them now, but we will respond to them and make sure that you get an answer to that. So all that being said, I'm going to sort of forego my moderator's prerogative to ask the first question and go straight to a question from Katrina Wirt in Denver. And I'm going to unmute you now, Katrina. If I understand correctly, you're asking about the guidelines and role of WIA funds in the development of these centers. And I think that your comments, Greg, about WIA as a double-edged sword are useful, but maybe, Katrina, you can elaborate your question.
Well, I'd absolutely agree it's a double-edged sword, but I think our question is we're starting to explore a similar approach here in Denver. And in our discussion started thinking, as we allocate these funds and we make funding decisions with our WIA dollars, we'd like to provide staff and also ourselves with some specific guidelines or guiding criteria that reflect this sector-based philosophy. So we were just interested, are there other workforce centers that have created similar position statements? Is this something you've developed in Chicago? We'd love to review what others have developed to help inform the work that we're going to do.
What exists, I know we would be happy to, work with you and provide the, details, the scope of services for our delegate agencies and some of the language and some of those things. I know New York City has also, worked on this, although they're primarily not using Workforce Investment Act dollars. They're using another resource altogether. Sector programs, obviously, Jim can provide a wealth of things, but within the workforce system, I think is what you're asking.
Correct.
We don't know of as many places that are using WIA. I've gone to a number of meetings, and NNSP's partner, the Aspen Institute, has a group that gets together, and most entities really are doing it somewhat outside of the using WIA as a partner, but not as the sort of the core central location for the activities.
Well, I think this question is one that we at NNSP hear from our members who are WIBs who are interested in organizing around sector, and some of the questions have to do with what kinds of allowable uses of WIA funds and what the funds can be used, what different purposes they can be used for. In Chicago, did you use WIA funds for some purposes but not others? And if so, could you, briefly outline that?
Well, we did. And then this is the importance of having a diversity of funds, even though we'd like it to be more other than WIA dollars. But, for example, the lean manufacturing, was not WIA dollars, was corporate dollars. Overall, our the placements that we have are about half of the total placements are WIA enrolled, and that's with the it's a little bit less than that, but the two centers combined. So just to give you an idea of where we're at in terms of placements. So the system, if you will, the WIA system, has taken a hit in terms of some of the WIA dollars not going directly into just placements, but going into developing the business relationships, and that is, I think that's one of the key successes to the program.
And training activities, again, we pride ourselves as a system of having a very sort of low, what might say a cost per participant, and it may be a little bit higher in a sense because we're doing more intensive work, with those customers that are getting placed primarily because it's a recruiting for the business and helping them, to get the workers trained and so on.
Okay, thanks for that. I want to acknowledge something that you said earlier too about support that the state played in the early stages of developing these centers, I think through the Critical Skills Shortages Initiative. Is that right?
Yeah, the state is a major, it has its own, major sector focus. I mean, they've said in terms of competitive grants that they may have available, if it's not sector-driven, it's not going to happen. They aren't allowing sort of any new concepts that don't have a sector drive, and they have a large, process through their own, through the Critical Skills Shortage Initiative, through the state, what's called Illinois WorkNet, which is a new web portal which has 4 or 5 different sort of industry pages that focus on efforts, and through task forces of the state work in a number of the industries to come up with what are the solutions that are needed in each industry. So that leadership has been very helpful, sort of in parallel to what we've been working on.
Thanks for that. I want to say that the role that states can play in supporting regional workforce initiatives is something also that NNSP has been involved in, particularly with a project with the National Governors Association and Corporation for a Skilled Workforce. And it's clear that there are important supports that states can and are playing, and Illinois is one of those states that's participating in that project. So I'm glad to see how it's helping to bear this kind of fruit. I want to get to another questioner. Harry Dispenza from DOL has a question that I think has to do with the integration of registered apprenticeships. Harry, are you there? And can you go ahead and ask your question?
I am, and thank you very much. Innovative training programs was mentioned, and it sounds great, and a new concept is always a welcome addition. But since registered apprenticeship has been around for so long and it's employer-sponsored and driven, why hasn't it been offered as an option to business partners, and why hasn't registered apprenticeship been seen as other than competition with current programs when we work in concert with those programs such as ServiceWorks, ManufacturingWorks, city colleges? We're looking for them as partners rather than competition because we work in concert with each other.
Okay, thanks for that question. I guess the way that registered apprenticeships, can, but maybe sometimes aren't integrated is, I think, a good general question for our panel. And if you can just take a moment, unfortunately we don't have too much time to spend to address some of the issues, that would be helpful.
Yeah. As I mentioned earlier, the Chicago Federation of Labor has been certainly a critical part of the work that we've done from the initial research that they funded with the Center for Labor and Community Research to help us put this together. We also recognize that, Henry, I agree that we have opportunity in registered apprenticeships, and that may be an area we want to concentrate on more going forward, especially as we're looking at construction industry as a sector for Chicago as well.
Okay, thanks for that response. And I will remind our audience that if we don't get to your questions, that you can follow up with our presenters, or that we will take all questions that have been submitted already and pass them on. So, and if you have follow-up questions, you can also feel free to contact our presenters or me directly. And I particularly want to apologize to Sally Coronado and William Schwartz, who have outstanding questions we're not going to be able to get to, but thank you for submitting those. So our time is up. I want to make a brief mention of the NNSP National Conference. The webinar that we've been part of today is, I think, emblematic of the kind of presentations and sessions that we hope to have, and we may very well be able to persuade Chicago to join us in Washington, D.C. this November to share their further findings and learnings and developments in their system. So if you're interested, please do look on our website, and early bird registration for our conference is open now. NNSP members get a significant discount. And you can even follow us on Twitter if you like. Last, I do want to leave a little time for you all to give us your feedback on this session. And if you can, just take half a minute, it shouldn't take more, to complete the evaluation that will pop up at the end of the session. So thank you for your time, and thanks to our wonderful presenters. Is there anything else that you'd all like to add?
Again, thanks, Jim, for the opportunity to speak on this, and just to offer the opportunity, offline to work with myself and with Jeff from the Department of Community Development for the City of Chicago to be able to provide other input about the trials and tribulations, if you will, of the doing a sector-driven strategy with the primary source of WIA funding. We have other data that we'd be happy to share as well.
And this is Joanna Green. I just wanted to take one more opportunity to thank the Joyce Foundation and just to remind all of our participants how important it is to have the support of forward-thinking foundations to supply funding and guidance on looking at these research and development issues and these new initiatives to really improve the workforce system.
Well, here to that. So thank you all, and we will adjourn now, and you will receive reports and the reports that are mentioned and the slideshow and recording in your inbox within the next several days. Thank you.
Thank you.